Well, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the 20th century is unique in containing human suffering. The book of Job invites us to take a much broader view and to recognise that suffering is indeed part of the human condition. It's often said that Job is written to address the issue of human suffering. But of course, that's not really why it is written. It is written to help us to explore our responses to this suffering. It's incredibly natural to have a response in the midst of suffering as to something like, what did I do to deserve this? Have I done something that has brought this suffering upon me? And Job is surrounded by these friends, or so-called friends, that keep telling him that he has done something. He has sinned in some way, and that's why he is suffering in the way he is. But of course, the book is written to challenge that very human assumption and that very human response. And the book gives us a chance to step back from that response and to take a wider view and perhaps approach suffering in a more theological and a more prayerful way. Of course, at the moment, we are surrounded by suffering with the pandemic, and over 1 million people have now lost their lives to this. And of course, we are bracing ourselves now for lockdown to finish and for cases to escalate. And of course, there will be more suffering and more pain, and more people asking that question: what have I done to deserve this? How could this possibly happen to me or to my loved one? How is it that I've lost my job, that our business has gone broke, that my loved ones have died? And of course, Job is not going to answer that question. But Job is actually going to encourage us to do something else with that question. In the New Testament, we see this dynamic that Job tries to address once again. Jesus and his disciples encounter this man who was born blind. And they ask the question, the disciples asked Jesus the question, who sinned that this man should be born blind? Did he sin, or did his parents sin? And Jesus' response is, that's not the way it works. Jesus could have easily said to him, why don't you go away and read Job and come back and we'll explore another question, because that's not the question that we are asking. Job is written for people just like us, who are seeking to engage in our response to suffering. As I said, Job's friends tell him that it's his fault. His wife basically says, just give up, curse God and die. And in that heavenly scene at the beginning of the story, we see the heavenly council. It's like a courtroom, and the prosecuting attorney in this scene is the one called the Satan. And long before Hollywood took over all that kind of imagery that we get, we find in Job the idea of a heavenly courtroom and the one who is the accuser, who keeps saying to the heavenly judge, in this case God, this man is guilty, this man is not as good as you think he is. And then later in John's Gospel again, we see God providing the defence attorney, the advocate, the one who stands beside us and pleads our innocence, and that the ruler of the world, the prosecuting attorney, is cast out. And then, of course, if you have only a defence lawyer and no prosecutor, the verdict always must be that this person is innocent. Well, no, Job actually takes a different approach to this. And in chapter 23, which we've been asked to look at today, we hear, after Job's listened to his friends say he must be guilty, we get Job deciding to do something else with this. And he says, "Today also my complaint is bitter. God's hand is heavily despite my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him." And we hear in there a real desire. Oh, that I knew where I might find him. A real desire to go to God, to engage with God in this questioning, not to listen to the friends, but to actually engage with God on this question. That I might even come to his dwelling. I would lay my case before him. So it's not, Job's not saying, I'm going to ask him why I'm suffering. I'm going to tell him why I shouldn't be suffering. I'm going to lay my case before him, and I'm going to fill my mouth with arguments and find out what he would answer me and consider what he would say. Now, this is Job's response to suffering, and perhaps it could also be our response to suffering. Rather than saying, what did I do to deserve this? To go to God and to say, well, here I am. Tell me why this is happening. The well-known actor and Jewish atheist Stephen Fry was famously asked what he would say to God, and it's although Stephen Fry would claim to be a total atheist and his Jewish heritage comes out in this answer, and I just want to share with you a little bit of this clip.
It's all true, and you walk up to the pearly gates and you are confronted by God. What will Stephen Fry say to him, her, or it?
I will basically, what's known as theodicy, I think. I'll say, bone cancer in children? What's that about? How dare you? How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain?
Now, Fry's response to that question is so illustrative. It is a very Job-like response. Why? Tell me about this. Tell me why that happens. I recently undertook a 30-day retreat and experienced the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. And one of the key parts of the spiritual exercises is what's called the colloquy, or the conversation with God, or one of the Holy Three. And Ignatius encourages us to actually go to God and to say, this is how I'm feeling. I'm angry. I'm anxious. I'm hurting. I'm sad. And to enter into a conversation about that and to see how God responds. This is what Job is wanting to do. He's not listening to his friends. He's with standing that idea that this suffering has come upon him because he is responsible for it somehow. And he wants to go and have a conversation with God. Now, I think this is a wonderful way to respond to this. And Job wants to take his questioning to God and see how God responds. Wants to enter into colloquy, as St. Ignatius would say. He wants to have a conversation. And whenever we do that, whenever I do that, I find that God's response is always so unexpected. It is something that I couldn't have dreamt up or made up or concocted myself. It's not even something I could have possibly thought of. when I go to God and say, tell me about this, the response is always unexpected. It's sad, I think, that while Stephen Fry has questions, he has never paused and taken those questions to God and sat long enough, as Job does, on his dung heap, scraping his sores with broken pottery, and waited long enough and questioned long enough and sat silently long enough to hear the answers. Since I came back from my long retreat, I've been running a 8-week course on the exercises and encouraging people to do precisely what Job was doing. To actually, those questions you have, don't ask me, don't ask your friends. They're not going to be able to respond. Take those questions to God. I was working with someone in the group who's given me permission to tell this story, and we were looking at the wedding at Cana, and this particular person said, I've got a real problem with what's going on in this story, this abundance of alcohol and people being drunk, and I don't feel very comfortable with that. And I said, well, did you take that to Jesus? Did you take your discomfort to Jesus? And she said, well, that's what you've taught us to do. Yes, that's what I did. And I said, how did he respond? And she said, well, I went to him and I said, I am really uncomfortable with what's going on in this scene. I'm actually really uncomfortable with what you did. And I said, how did Jesus respond to that? And she said, he said that sometimes I feel being human is uncomfortable as well. And all of a sudden, the suffering and the uncomfortableness and the distress was met by a God who understands what it is to be uncomfortable in our human skin, to feel pain and suffering and anguish in our human skin. And I said, well, what did you feel? This person said, I felt accepted. That's what Job is looking for. That's what Job is after. Now it's said that we with the biblical faith believe passionately in a God of love and compassion and justice, and yet we sit in the uncomfortableness of a world that is often filled with suffering and anguish and pain and sorrow. And yet we sit in that and we plead that God would come and have a conversation with us about that. But what I learned in the spiritual exercises is that God is always willing to have a conversation with us about that. Not only willing, but desperately desires for us to come and to bring our anguish and our anger and our questions. And when we do that, we are always surprised by that God of surprises. It's difficult to accept that we don't understand the reasons for suffering. But we do believe that ultimately God is a God of justice, of healing, of wholeness and peace. As Dr. Martin Luther King says, that the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And maybe we can paraphrase that the arc of God is long and encompasses much suffering, but it bends towards healing and wholeness and peace. That's the story of Job. The Lord be with you.